Welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast, hosted by divorce financial analyst and retirement planning counselor Andrew Hatherley. Join Andrew and guest experts as they help late-life divorcees build the financial and mental foundation for a meaningful future. There is life after divorce. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast. I know many of you listening are in your 50s, 60s, or even older. I know many of you are working in jobs or professions that demand a lot of your time and energy. And I know from having spoken with many of you that a lot of you are really looking forward to retirement. I've got an idea of what you're thinking because I've thought it too. I think about it. And the idea of waking up in the morning and not having any tasks or phone calls or meetings to attend is quite appealing. If I want to go play tennis or golf or ride a bike, I can do that. Or maybe read a book that's been sitting in my bookshelf for years, or watch one of my favorite classic movies like Chinatown or Jaws for the 15th time. The prospect of having the free time to do these things is pretty exciting. But there's a danger to all this free time. The absence of the structure that guided our working life can lead to feelings of aimlessness and dissatisfaction, and it can cause problems in our relationships and lead to mid to late life divorce. I've seen it with several of my clients and discussed it with other professionals who've seen it too. One such professional is my guest today, Marianne Oehser. Marianne is a certified retirement and relationship coach. Marianne holds a Master of Management from Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management in Chicago and is the author of Your Happiness Portfolio for Retirement. It's Not About the Money. Having retired twice after spending over 40 years in the corporate world, she found traditional retirement unfulfilling and started her coaching business, Retire and Be Happy. Marianne is committed to helping people create a happy, fulfilling post-career phase of their lives through her workshops, seminars, public speaking, and individual coaching. Marianne, welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a delight to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I look forward to chatting with you about this very important subject today. And I'd like to start by asking you about your retirement experience. You were in the corporate world, you retired twice, and found it maybe wasn't what you expected. And I'd hope that you could share with our listeners what you discovered in your initial retirement experiences and how it led you to retirement coaching.
I'm happy to share that story, primarily because I don't want anybody to have to go through what I went through. In the lead up to the first retirement was very exciting and stressful. But my former husband and I both worked for a major airline, and we were in significant positions, and there was a hostile takeover. And as part of that, we got golden parachutes, which was fantastic. I was only 40, he was 58. So seemed like a right thing to do. We were excited. We had just built a house in Florida. We moved to Florida, and everything was going to be fantastic for the rest of our lives until it wasn't. And part of the problem was that I really wasn't ready to retire. So I went on and got a real estate broker's license and managed an office and that kind of stuff. So I was involved, but he wasn't. And he never could quite figure out who he was anymore, now that he wasn't Mr. Big, and how he was going to have any kind of meaningful fulfillment in his life. And as a result, he ended up diving into pretty bad depression. And all of that led to undoing of our relationship, sadly. Now, if I had known then what I know now, it may not have ended up in that divorce situation. But I went back to the corporate world for another 15 years. And when I retired the second time, I knew I needed to go to something. And so I decided to become a relationship coach. Now, along the way, I had met my wonderful husband, now of 23 years, and I wanted everybody else to be as happy as we were. And the truth is that as I was working with couples, we lived in Naples, Florida at that time. As I was working with couples, I kept hearing the same story over again. We used to have a great relationship, and now all we do is bicker and fight. And the common denominator, retirement. So I earned another two other certifications to understand what was going on in retirement that was having such a negative impact on their relationships, which has led me to doing the things that I do now, because relationship is an extremely important part of the whole retirement picture. But I can tell you that gray divorce is a very sad situation, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen as a result of retirement.
You open up a couple of lines of pursuit in our conversation there. I mean, the first thing I noticed is something that I discuss with my clients all the time, is that when thinking about retirement, have something to retire to. Don't just be so concerned about, oh, I don't want to work anymore. And the idea that over the rainbow is this idyllic world. Could you perhaps elaborate on the idea of retiring to something?
Sure, because what you said about what you talk to your clients about is so right. So many people have this Hollywood version of what retirement's going to be, a glorious 30-year vacation, which sounds enticing, but it's not sustainable, and it's certainly not realistic. And so when people look at this as the next chapter of their life, and for most of us, it's could be as close to a third of our life, and plan it from that perspective of what do I want my life to be like? And yeah, is vacation part of it? Sure. And you have got more time to do it. So yeah, it's still an important part of it. But there's so much more to this next chapter of your life that needs to be thought through, and not just assume that it's going to magically somehow unfold, because it probably won't.
You talk about the idea of taking vacations, and I know a lot of people like the idea of retiring to a golf lifestyle. And for me, I had thought about my previous thinking about retirement, and I still haven't retired, and that's another discussion. Um, but I had thought, well, when I retire, I'm going to be playing tennis all the time, and riding my bike, and traveling. But the fact is, those things right now to me are a novelty and exciting. But once you're in the world of retirement, once you're retired, there comes to be somewhat of a level of, in the financial world, we use the term diminishing returns. And I think there's a much more complex psychological term. I think it's, was it hedonic?
Hedonic adaptation.
Hedonic adaptation. That's it. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about these false notions we have that all this free time is going to be a wonderful thing.
Yes, but you talk about the psychological concept of hedonic adaptation, and what it means is, hedonism is the underlying word for hedonic, but hedonism is not necessarily a bad thing. It's the enjoyment of pleasure. And what happens though with our minds is, when there's something scarce, like you were talking about being able to play tennis and go on trips, when you don't have enough time to do as much of that as you want to, you really crave it. But then when you can do it all day, every day, it no longer is special. It becomes ordinary and mundane. And so our minds adapt to that by saying, okay, this isn't special anymore. It's everyday stuff. And it's not as exciting as it used to be. And many times that leads people to big disappointment, thinking, oh, this retirement isn't what I thought it was going to be at all.
Yeah, no, exactly. And in reading many of the articles that you've written about, the subject of retirement and the potential stressors, and the advice that you give to your clients, one thing that struck me that really resonated with me, because I've noticed it as well, is the absence of a structure, that kind of free form freedom, is a double-edged sword, in that it can lead to feelings of aimlessness and dissatisfaction. And we tend to poo-poo the word routine. We poo-poo the term discipline, but ultimately, they can bring you freedom. That's another paradox that we're seeing, within the retirement conversation.
That's absolutely true. And my dear friend Anya DiGiorgio often speaks about this. She's a real expert in the whole idea of structuring your life. And as she says, the paradox is that in order to enjoy the freedom that you have, the first thing you have to give up is a little bit of freedom in terms of creating a structure that works for you. Now, for most of us, the reason we're so happy not to have structure is because it's usually imposed by somebody else. The institution that you work for, your clients, whatever it is, and you often don't have a lot of control over that. So the idea of being able to do whatever you want whenever you want to is pretty doggone enticing. But as you say, when there's no structure in your life, you tend to not get things done.
Mhm.
And often I've spoken with people who would say, I'm busy, but at the end of the day, it's like, so what? Because they aren't filling their day in a thoughtful, meaningful way. So they're doing the things that come along, but they are not necessarily the things that make them feel like their life is meaningful.
Well, that's so important as well because you alluded to it a minute ago in discussion of your ex-husband. But when we have that structure in place in work, we feel that we're getting something done for our clients or our boss or whatever. But when we're given this blank canvas, if we don't impose some sort of structure on it, we may just idle away the day, laying on the couch and not getting anything done that fulfills us, gives us a sense of meaning and purpose.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right.
You know, to add to that, I don't know whether it was Anna who said this or you in one of the articles, but this freedom brings a sense of responsibility with it. And I think responsibility is very important. And I'm a big believer in that we always have something that we have to be responsible for, whether it's our families, our clients, or just being a good person and trying to leave the world a better place. Um, but we need to bring a bit of that with us into this new era of our lives.
You're so right about that. And often we think of the word responsibility as being this heavy thing that it's a have to thing. But if you reframe it a little bit and realize that responsibility also is what gives you the opportunity to fill your life with the things that make you feel good and that improve your well-being, that responsibility is a pleasure. It's a gift.
You talked about feeling good. I mean, to me, I think the first responsibility we have is to ourselves and to treat our minds and our bodies in a way that we bring the best version of ourselves into the world. And so perhaps we could talk a little bit about what practical things people can do to infuse their post work lives. And I know it's not always a rigid distinction. We can talk about that a little bit too. But what's perhaps a good way to, or an easy way to bring ourselves into positive habits? I know for me personally, and you talk about this in your writing, is to begin the day uh, with a sense of energy. And so a good night's sleep. And for me, I probably exercise 5 out of 7 days of the week, start with a good protein rich breakfast, and have the energy to go on and do more things throughout the day. Could you expand on that and maybe offer some practical tips to people to how to bring this discipline responsibility into their lives?
Yeah, I think if you think of it as a framework, and the first piece of the framework that I would encourage you to think about is the 80-20 rule. And we're all familiar with the old 80-20 rule. In this case, what it is you think about what are the 20% of the things that you do that create 80% of your well-being, however you define well-being, and that's another complex topic. And therefore, if you focus on those 20% that create that well-being and design your activities to make sure that you're including those kinds of activities, you will boost your well-being. So that's the first piece of what I would look at. The second is just exactly what you were talking about, a powerful routine first thing in the morning. Um, the doing something right out of the bat that gives you a sense of energy and creates, and especially if you have a routine that encourages you to do that on a regular basis, it pumps your energy up for the rest of the day, as you were saying with your power workouts. Another thing that happens that might help is to think of your activities that you're going to do during the day in mindful time containers, is what it's often called. And that, when I first heard that term, I thought, yeah, it's way too structured for me. But the concept is that if you choose and set a period of time for which when you're going to get something done, that that task that you're going to do doesn't creep over and spill over into all kinds of other times. I mean, how many times have you said, I'm just going to do this for 5 minutes, and 2 hours later you're still doing it? And because you haven't set a structure. And there's a work process called the Pomodoro technique, which creates 25-minute time containers, if you will, that a task is supposed to be done. And during that 25 minutes, you focus only on that task, and then take a 5-minute break and do another 25 minutes. Now, you may not want it that structured in your personal life, but just think about things like reading the news. You can sit down to read the news and think that you're only going to spend 10 minutes of it, but if you're not purposeful, you might still be doing it an hour later, where you've gone down a bunch of rabbit holes and you've spent time doing things that in hindsight you say, why did I waste my time doing that? So
Well,
if you're purposeful.
there's the danger of social media as well.
Oh, yeah.
And that can be a terrible time suck, and that's a subject probably another podcast, is how we can detoxify ourselves from social media. But I'm sorry, I'll let you continue.
No, that's true. And then the fourth part of that framework basically is based on a concept that Dan Sullivan, who was the founder of Strategic Coach and a really innovative thinker, and has had a lot of impact on a lot of people's lives, including mine. And he thinks that your days should have themes, and particularly as you're creating a structure for your own life, that idea has a lot of applicability. So for him, when you're using it in the term of a business situation, a focus day for me is a day when I do my writing. And I don't schedule meetings, I don't schedule other things that are going to interrupt. On a personal day, a focus day would be the day that you're going to do your volunteer work, or the day that you're going to, to play tennis or do the things that are part of your well-being. And then other days are days that you'd fill up with doctor's appointments and errands and the little things that otherwise can interfere with the activities that you want on your focus days. So if you put the little things that you kind of have to do into a bucket of half a day or a day or whatever you need to, that'll free you up to be able to enjoy the other days doing what it is that you want to do.
I hear you talk about the time containers and focus days. This is certainly not, this is something that can be used in our working lives as well, because as we all know, there are aspects of our work, some aspects of our work that we enjoy more than others. And as we know also that once we're distracted from a task, it can take a while to get back to that task, and interruptions can be a terrible
Killer of productivity, for sure.
Yes, thank you for help. Yes, exactly. And so once again, it raises the discussion that I think that our work lives and our quote unquote lives in retirement don't necessarily have to be this dichotomy 180 degrees different than one another. We can bring the good things that gave us meaning and purpose in our work lives, and some of the things that led us to be successful, and apply them to our retirement lives, where perhaps we're more dedicated to the things that are above the line, things that give us more energy, things that put us in that flow state where time where time seems to go so quickly, whether we're doing something creative or we're interacting with family or friends. To me, that's the idea of retirement, is that we continue being purposeful, productive individuals, but it's just more enjoyable because we're doing activities that give us energy, put us in this state of flow, and ultimately make us happier.
You're so absolutely right about that. And a minute ago you asked me what people could do, and I think that building on what you just said, one of the things that you can do to make sure that your life is filled with well-being is to look at what you did, what you enjoyed doing when you were working,
Yes.
and find ways to do those same kinds of things in a different way, apply them differently. So for example, if you loved solving problems and that was what gave you a great deal of enjoyment in your professional life, then know that there are ways in this next chapter that you can look for ways to use problem solving techniques and the fulfillment that you get. Maybe it's working, maybe that's something that you do as a volunteer situation. Maybe it's something that you do to help your kids in some way, whatever it is, to find a way to use that. But the other thing, in terms of you were talking about structuring time, that I recommend, and it's actually the topic of my book, Your Happiness Portfolio for Retirement. It's not about the money, because I believe that in addition to a strong financial portfolio that you need in order to be able to afford to retire, you need a happiness portfolio, which is how you manage your time in retirement. So that you in my book I talk about 8 asset classes, if you will, that are the important non-financial, all of them non-financial areas. And when you think about, and back to your issue about some kind of structure, if you think about those 8 areas and think about how much of my time do I want to spend doing any of these things, so that you can make sure that you're making time for the things that you really want to do. And leisure certainly is an important part of this time of your life, but too many people think that 100% of your time is going to be spent on leisure, whereas that will lead to a very unfulfilling life over the long term. So it's how do you want to address each of those other 8 areas in your life?
Yeah, that reminds me of a tool of positive psychology called the Wheel of Life,
Mhm.
where you have these 8 different areas of your life, whether it can be your physical health, your relationships with other people, leisure activities. Um, I know work is included in there, but your life can become completely out of balance if it's all about playing golf or if it's all about taking vacations. Um, Ultimately, I think we should be striving. I mean, we will always be somewhat out of balance, but we never want our lives to be completely overwhelmed by that one thing.
Exactly. Absolutely, exactly.
You mentioned in doing the things we enjoy, and I don't know if you've heard of the VIA Strengths Finder. This is
Oh, very
another
much so. Yep. Mhm.
tool of positive psychology, and when I was in my early 50s, I thought, well, I'm going to retire at 60 and play golf, tennis, travel. And then I got divorced at age 52. And I had to rethink some of my financial expectations.
Surprise.
Surprise, surprise. Well, the funny thing is that by the time I reached 60, I had rebuilt financially and was in a very good place and started thinking about retirement again because I always had this magic number of 60. And then I began to think and do some research, and as you said earlier, well, what would I retire to? I said, well, if I'm going to continue until I've got that a little clearer, um, I'm doing good work, but what can I do to perhaps make my work life a little bit more enjoyable? And so you talked about transition to retirement, but in our work lives, we can transition to make our work lives more enjoyable by focusing on those things that we're good at, and that the areas where we can have a positive impact on other people. And for me, I've just, I write an article for Kiplinger's.com. I write a lot of stuff. I do the podcast, which involves a lot of writing, and we're now into and this is episode 53 or 54. But I never anticipated that at 60 years of old age, I'd be doing these things. But it gives my work a sense of energy and fulfillment, particularly when people call me on the phone and say, "Hey, I love that episode of your podcast. Can you help me with this issue in my divorce?" And that's all comes from focusing on the things that we're good at and or we enjoy doing. And I think that should be kind of the goal for life, really.
I completely agree with that.
You know, coaching is so important. When you were talking about your daily routine, I just was thinking today, as a matter of fact, um, I have a personal trainer, and I work out with him 3 days a week. And I said, you've got pretty good job security, because it's very important to me that I maintain my physical health and I continue to enjoy the benefits, both physically and mentally, from working out. And he provides that level of accountability to me that I'm not sure would be there. Oh, I'm not sure. I'm 100% sure it wouldn't be there if I wasn't, writing a monthly check to this fellow and making sure that this part of my life was a solid routine to get my days off to a good start. And I anticipate that in retirement as well, is not only during my working life.
It's funny. We often use the analogy of a personal trainer to talk about the work that we do in terms of coaching, because retirement coaching is a very emerging area. It didn't exist when I retired the first time. It wasn't there. And so when I started investigating all of this stuff, there were not very many sources available. But it's now emerging, and the analogy that we use is, think of the 1980s and 90s. How many people had personal trainers then? And now it is the right way to do if you want to continue to have a program that's really working for your body and you do it consistently. And coaching is very much the same thing. It is all about accountability.
In the time we have left, I wanted to pivot back to the issue of couples in retirement. And you said the strain on your relationship uh, with your husband's attitude towards his life in retirement. And I guess it's all about understanding what this new life is going to be like. What assumptions and expectations do we have going in, and what can we do to perhaps mitigate against, or to be ready for this, to protect the relationship?
You're so right, because the influence of retirement on a relationship is very much a two-way street. In other words, if you have a strong relationship, primary relationship in your life, it's much easier for you to deal with all of the things that change, because you've got a support system built in. But conversely, all of the things that change can impact your relationship. And so part of what I was seeing with these couples was they did not have a strong enough communication system in place, for example, to talk about the assumptions that each of them were making about how their life was going to unfold. A story I often tell, and this is not an exaggeration, it's a true story. A couple came in to see me. They were literally thinking about divorce, and it was their first meeting. And he was talking about how great the last couple of years had been of their bucket list trips and all the places they'd gone, and she was sitting there with her arms crossed. And the more he talked, the harder her jaw got, until she absolutely exploded. Why do I always have to do the laundry? I'm retired too. And he looked at her like he had no idea what in the world she was talking about. And the truth was, he had assumed that she liked doing that stuff. She had assumed he had more time and he was going to help her with that stuff. And even though she dropped a couple of hints, he didn't pick up on the hints, and they never talked about it. And that doing the laundry thing was that little itsy pebble that's in the bottom of your shoe that all of a sudden becomes such a huge rock that you can't walk. That's how important talking about your assumptions can be in every place of your relationship. And that couple ended up not getting divorced because they were able to talk it through and figure
Right.
out what it was that they were assuming, what was getting in the way of their relationship, so that they actually went on and had a much better relationship than they did in the beginning.
No, no, communication is
Communication
so
is
important.
so important, so
You know,
important, and assumptions are so important to dispel.
one thing that I've seen um, in dealing with my clients, both on the financial advisory side and in the divorce realm, is that particularly with the spouse that was the hard driving, dare I say, workaholic, and then all of a sudden they quit and they're adrift and they're hanging around the house
You
and they
know,
don't know what to do with their time, and all of us, the other spouse's routine is being disturbed. You talk about me time and we time. Perhaps you could elaborate on that and how that could help people.
it's a critical part of the equation with couples for sure. And what I mean by that is now you've got all of this time that you can spend together. And while that is, if you've got a strong relationship, that's wonderful. You can't wait to spend more time together. However, it's important for both parties to maintain their separateness as a person, the things that they particularly enjoy doing individually, to develop that's who they are as a person. And so both people need that time to focus on and then come together and enjoy other times it's we time. Besides, if you do spend 24 hours a day all the time together at dinner time, you don't have a whole lot to talk about if neither one of you have, if you've been doing the same thing all day because you've
Right.
experienced everything the same. So it's I mean, I say that in a lighthearted manner, but it's fundamentally true in terms of the richness that each person brings to that relationship when you maintain what is important to you as an individual and share it then with time that's shared time, we time. So me time things that are good for you, we time things that the couple does together.
That's terrific advice, Marianne. But there's so much that we can talk about here. Um,
Yeah.
if our listeners are interested in finding more about your work, how you help people go through some of the retirement and relationship issues we've discussed today, how can they find you?
I actually have two websites. One is Retire and Be Happy. And the second one is I've recently, well, 4 years ago, formed a partnership with um, a woman who had been a financial advisor for 38 years. And so we also support financial advisors to get this information out because you said awareness, it's all about awareness. So you can either reach me at Marianne, my first name is spelled one word, Marianne, at Retire and Be Happy, or Marianne at nextchapterlifestyleadvisors.com.
Nextchapterlifestyleadvisors.com. Great. So retire and be happy and nextchapterlifestyleadvisors.com. If the listeners Google those, they'll find you and they can also email you.
Perfect. Perfect.
Marianne, thank you very much for joining us here today. This has been a great conversation. Really
It's
appreciate
been
it.
fun, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gray Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.